Hey guys, we are ready for chapter 14 out of George Washington Saxe. Wake up, son. Come on now. It's no time for sleeping. Matt could hear a deep voice calling. It sounded as if it was coming from the end of a tunnel. He groaned as the voice got louder. I'm getting up, Dad. I am, Matt mumbled with his eyes still closed. Tell Mom I don't want any breakfast. I've got gym first period today. And I'll just throw up if I have anything to eat. If I have to eat anything, he moaned. I'm glad to hear that you still have enough life left in you to be talking about breakfast, the deep voice replied. There you are, on your feet. Matt opened his eyes and found himself standing, or rather leaning, on a heavy-set man in a brown wool cloak. He was an older man with bushy gray eyebrows and a bristly mustache. Dad? Is that you, Dad? Matt croaked. The man smiled, shaking the snow from Matt's head. No, lad, I'm not your father. My name is Nathan Hornbeam. You're just a bit confused is all. Come on, then. You need to thaw out and get some of that breakfast you were groaning about. My farm is just through these woods, not an hour's ride. We can take my Bess here, he said, walking Matt to his horse. Matt blinked hard and suddenly realized where he was. Israel, he cried out. My friend is sick, he said, turning to face Mr. Hornby. You've got to help me with him, Matt pleaded. He looked behind him, searching for Israel. But Mr. Hornby quickly turned him around. No, lad. Don't look back there, he said, keeping his large gloved hands on Matt's shoulders. I'm afraid there's nothing more to be done for your friend now. But I can't leave him, Matt protested, wiggling out of the old man's grasp and running from him. When Matt reached the tree, he let out a sound that was half cry and half scream, for there, lying on his back, was Israel. Matt knew it was Israel because he could see the bit of blue from the old coat that stuck out of the snow and his bright red sneaker, with its frozen laces all undone. There was little else to recognize, for the storm had left its gruesome mark, erasing Israel's face in a cover of snow. I can't leave him. I can't, Matt sobbed. Aye, lad, you can, Mr. Hornby said gently, for he's left himself. He's no longer here, but in God's glorious kingdom. The old man put his arm around Matt and guided him to the horse. The Patriots are just down the road, Mr. Hornby whispered. There are Tories living all through these parts, and if Colonel Rall is alerted, these woods will be crawling with Hessians and rebel hunters. We must make haste. But Matt was so exhausted and overcome with grief that he began to topple over. He remembered little of what Mr. Hornby's lifting him onto his horse or the ride to the Hornby farm. When Matt finally came to his senses, it was his sense of smell that came alive first. He sniffed the sweet aroma of wood smoke and apples. On opening his eyes, he found himself lying before a large fireplace. Several black cast-iron pots and kettles hung from an iron arm that swung over the fire. In the pot closest to Matt, a brew of spicy apple cider was slowly simmering. Matt yawned, lazily savoring the delicious feeling of warmth that had spread over him. The bitter cold and dampness of the night before seemed far away as Matt snuggled down under the cozy mountain of wool blankets that had been piled on him. It was such a relief to feel good, finally, that he decided not to think about it and to just feel it. But as soon as he decided not to think about it, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Why do you feel so good? Matt wondered. Where am I? Looking down beneath the blankets, he could see that he was no longer in his clothes. Instead, he had on a long white nightgown with ruffles around the collar and cuffs. He winced, instinctively knowing that it was a woman's garment. As Matt looked around, he could see that the room was not very big, with one small window affording the only light. Matt looked out the window and saw that it was an overcast day. He wondered what time it was. He looked past the window to see a long, narrow table and with some wooden bowls on it. In a corner, there was a spinning wheel. A basket overflowing with raw wool sat beside it. In another corner, a woman was sitting at a loom. She was dressed very plainly in long skirts and a white apron. The expression on her face was as drab as the green-colored shawl that she wore over her shoulders. Her gray hair was pulled back tight in an angry little bun, and the only sound that she made was the whack, whack, whack on her loom. Every now and then she would stop to nervously scratch at a scab on her face. Mrs. Pritchett, Matt thought on seeing her. She looks just like the crabby old Mrs. Pritchett from the 2nd grade. Hey, I hope you don't talk about your teachers like that. Suddenly, the woman looked up, and on seeing Matt awake, her thin lips curled down into a frown. She dropped the shuttle from her hand and rushed from the room. Matt could hear her shrill, tiny voice. "Nathan! Nathan! He's awake!" she cried. "Calm down. He's only a child. He'll bring us no harm," whispered Mr. Hornby, coming into the room. "His being here is harm enough," snapped the old woman angrily behind him. Mr. Hornby took a cup from a shelf and ladled some cider into it. He knelt down beside Matt and blew into the cup, testing to see if it was cool enough to drink. "It's hot, lad, but it will do you good," he said, carefully offering the cup to Matt. Matt thanked him and took a sip. "Israel, my friend, is he... "Yes, he's gone," Mr. Hornby said gently. "And you were close to being gone with him. I would have passed right by if a drummer hadn't stopped me and asked me to look out for you." "Henry?" Matt croaked. "I don't know what his name be, but he right saved your life. I was out along the Pennington Road, returning from my sister's farm, when I met up with the militia. If I hadn't known Major Horse personally, I might be a neighbor of his. I being a neighbor of his, I would have been taken for a spy for sure. They were that jittery, you see. But after Major Horst assured them of my loyalties, I was given clearance to proceed to my farm." Mr. Hornby reached for a small iron hook that hung beside the fireplace. He used it to lift a lid off a pot that was covered with hot coals. Matt could smell the rich aroma of a hearty stew as Mr. Hornby ladled some into a bowl. "Try this, son. It will give you strength," he said, handing the bowl to Matt. "Now, where was I? Oh, yes, on the Pennington Road. It was a foul a night as I've ever seen, and the brave lads were trudging along, when this drummer waved me over," Mr. Hornby explained. "He told me that you and your friend were down at the fork in the road, and he asked if I could assist you. Can you remember any of last night then?" Mr. Hornby looked down kindly at Matt. Matt shuddered, looking over to the fire, as the memory of the night before came rushing back. "It's like a dream," he whispered. "Like a fantastic dream, and it got so horrible I couldn't wake up from it. I feel like I still can't," Matt moaned. And that's the end of the chapter.